what's the difference between a pacemaker and a defibrillator? So these are very similar devices, but they do very completely different functions. The thing that's similar about them is that they go in the same way. Both of them are relatively small devices. A pacemaker is much smaller. It's about the size of a silver dollar. And a defibrillator is a little bit bigger. It's like the size of those old pager devices we used to wear before we all had smartphones to be paged to let us know that somebody's trying to reach us. And they both attach to one or two small spaghetti-like electrical wires, and the device is placed underneath the skin. You make a small incision and make a little pocket between your skin and fat layer and your chest muscle. We put the device there, and then we put these little wires into your heart through a vein, because we actually have arm veins from both sides draining blood from our arms back to our heart. And so we can enter those veins right where the device is sitting as the vein runs underneath your chest muscle to enter those veins with the little spaghetti-like wires, and then follow those veins into your heart, and they touch different walls of your heart and they grow into place. So both devices are placed similarly with a similar type surgery, but they do completely different functions, and they are not the same thing. People always say, oh, I have a defibrillator / pacemaker. No, you have a defibrillator. You don't need to call it a defibrillator / pacemaker. So what are the different functions? Well, a pacemaker is a much simpler device that just treats slow heart rates. So remember, your heart runs on electricity. There is a source of electricity that is actually telling your heart to beat. Your heart's just a big muscle, and every time it gets electricity, it has to beat. So it runs on electricity. It's just waiting for a signal. Every time it gets a signal, it beats. If it gets more signals, it beats faster. If it gets less signals, it beats slower. If it didn't get any signals, like a flat line on the rhythm monitor, your heart won't beat. It would just sit there waiting for a signal and you'd be dead. So your heart runs on electricity. Now there's a normal source of electricity that controls your heart. This is in the roof of your heart, and it's called the sinus node, and we're born with it. We all have it, and it sends out electricity based on the speed your brain wants your heart to go at. Your brain actually talks to those little cells, specialized cells in the roof of your heart. It tells them what speed it wants your heart to go at, and then it creates the electricity. Those cells, not your brain, the cells create the electricity and tell your heart to beat at that speed. This is why when you exercise, your heart rate speeds up, and when you're relaxed, it slows down. Your brain is controlling that. If your brain did not control your normal source, your heart rate would just be at one speed. Those cells would just send out electricity at one speed no matter what you did, and that wouldn't be ideal. So no, your brain does control this. But sometimes those cells get old, and sometimes as you age, well, everything else in your body ages. Not only your joints, not only your skin and your face and everything else, but your heart ages as well, and also the cells in your heart. And so these normal source cells can get old and start to malfunction. And then that's when we say you have sick sinus syndrome, or the sinus node cells are getting sick and they're starting to send out electricity at a slow speed that's too slow, and it's making you feel lousy. Or the other way you could have a slow heart rate is if the nerve that conducts electricity through your heart goes bad. Because it doesn't matter what source of electricity is in control of your heart, whether that be your normal source cells sending out electricity, or an abnormal rhythm like atrial fibrillation that's not life-threatening, that wakes up, takes over control of your heart away from your normal source and tells your heart to speed up before going back to sleep, or say some other abnormal rhythm cells that are potentially more dangerous that wake up and make your heart go at very dangerous, life-threatening speeds. It doesn't matter. Whatever source of electricity is in control of your heart, it's sending out electricity, but believe it or not, it's the bottom chambers of your heart, the ventricles, that actually do the pumping, not really the atria, which is the top chambers of your heart, because you have two upper chambers, two bottom chambers, two atria, two ventricles. And so there's actually a nerve that actually conducts electricity through your heart, because the atria, they're not really what's pumping the blood out of your heart. They just help push the blood from the top chambers to the bottom chambers. But it's the bottom chambers, the right and left ventricles, that pump the blood out of your heart. So when you feel your heart rate, you're actually feeling the bottom chambers, what speed they're going at. And so if your normal source was in control, it's sending out electricity, or if AFib was in control, sending out signals super fast, those signals have to get to the bottom chambers. So they go through that nerve, and then the nerve goes right down the middle wall, called the septum, and then splits into a right branch and a left branch. And that's how they deliver the electricity to both right and left bottom chambers, right and left ventricles, so they know what speed to beat at. And every time they get a signal, they contract. So if you have slow heart rates, it could either be that your normal source the sinus node is getting old and diseased and just going too slow, or it could mean that the nerve, the AV node, atrioventricular node or nerve, or the two branches, the right and left bundle branches, either part of the system, either the branches or the nerve or the source are going bad. And if they get old and start to not work correctly, that's when you can have slow heart rates. So if your normal source is going slow, then that's where you would have slow heart rates. And if your branches or a nerve conducting electricity through your heart was going bad, your normal source could be working fine. It could be sending out electricity at the proper speed, but if half those signals didn't get through because the nerve is blocking them, then your heart's only going to see half the signals or a third of the signals or 2/3 of the signals, just whatever amount's being blocked, and it's going to go too slow. And that's when we put in a simple pacemaker. That's why a dual chamber pacemaker or two chamber pacemaker has two wires. It has a wire touching the top chamber and a wire touching the bottom chamber. That's why it knows what's going on. If the problem is that the normal source is getting old and not sending out electricity properly, then the pacemaker can see that the top chamber is being told to beat super slow. And we program a speed that we say is average, usually 60 beats per minute. And we say, okay, if the heart rate's below 60 beats per minute, we want the pacemaker to take over control. So the normal source, if it's working at 50 or 40 or 30 beats per minute, going too slow, then the top wire fires off through the pacemaker and it sends out a signal artificially to make the top chamber go at 60 beats per minute. And then once it sends out that signal, it gets through the nerve and reaches the bottom chamber at 60 beats per minute. So everything's fine. If the person's having slow heart rates because the nerve is going bad and the normal source is working fine, but the nerve's just not conducting all the signals, well, then that's why you have two wires. So the top wire can tell the pacemaker, hey, the speed up here is 65, 70 beats per minute. It's not below 60 beats per minute. It's working fine. But every time it sends out a signal, the wire touching the bottom part of the heart says, okay, I know that a signal just got sent from up there because the top wire sensed it. I'm waiting for it to get through here and it didn't get through. It paces, it artificially sends out a signal as if the signal got through. If the signal gets through, fine. But if it doesn't get through, the pacemaker fills in the blanks. It just paces whenever it needs to so that the bottom chamber is going at the same speed as the top chamber. And then of course, if you have both problems where the normal source is going too slow and the nerve's not conducting everything, well, then you might be paced in both chambers. So that's a simple pacemaker. But a defibrillator is completely different. A defibrillator treats dangerous, fast heart rhythms. So in the same way that pacemakers just treat slow heart rates and would not be any kind of treatment by itself for an abnormal rhythm like atrial fibrillation, because atrial fibrillation makes the heart go fast, and anytime there's two sources of electricity fighting for control of the heart, the faster source always overrides the slower source and takes over control. So that's why if your normal source was going slow at 30 or 40 beats per minute and the pacemaker paces you at 60, well, that's the faster source, and it's going to take over control from the 30 or 40 beats per minute source, and now your heart rate's at 60 beats per minute. But if you're in an abnormal rhythm like atrial fibrillation, going fast at 120, 130 beats per minute, feeling palpitations, well, the pacemaker can't take over control of your heart unless it paces you at a faster speed. And why would you want to do that? Why would you pace at 140 beats per minute to treat the symptoms you're having at 130 beats per minute? That makes no sense. So a pacemaker doesn't do anything if you're in an abnormal heart rhythm. It is not a direct treatment for atrial fibrillation, unless of course we're using medicines to slow down your atrial fibrillation speeds, and those medicines make your normal rhythm too slow at times. So sometimes we put the pacemaker in to allow you to be treated with certain treatments for atrial fibrillation, but not a direct treatment itself. Now, a defibrillator treats not non-dangerous rhythms like atrial fibrillation, it treats dangerous abnormal rhythms. We said there are 15 different abnormal rhythms that you can develop problems with in your lifetime, and 3 or 4 out of the 15 are considered to be directly dangerous, life-threatening heart rhythms. These usually develop in the ventricles, the bottom chambers of your heart, and these sources of electricity, these abnormal sources, if they sleep and do nothing, fine, but if they randomly wake up and they take over control of your heart away from your normal source and they tell your heart to speed up, unlike atrial fibrillation, which will never make your heart go at a life-threatening speed, these dangerous rhythms can make your heart go at speeds literally as fast as 2 or 3 or even up to 400 beats per minute. Now, your heart will just follow directions and it will beat at that speed. It's not going to explode or anything. People always think their heart's going to explode if it goes at those speeds. No, your heart's not going to explode. But your heart will beat at those speeds, and unfortunately, at that rapid a speed, it can't effectively pump blood. It doesn't have time to fill up, pump. It's just kind of vibrating fasciculating, quivering, really isn't really pushing anymore. And so it's not circulating blood, it's not getting blood and oxygen to your brain, which means you're going to pass out and die within 20, 30 minutes. This is what you see on TV where people just collapse and people have to shock them with the defibrillator paddles. The defibrillator paddles will get the dangerous rhythm to temporarily go back to sleep. You can also use the defibrillator paddles to shock people out of atrial fibrillation or certain rhythms like that. It's called a cardioversion. That's not any kind of long-term treatment option for any rhythm. No shock cures you of a dangerous rhythm. It just gets the rhythm to stop for that moment, but those cells are still there, and whether or not they wake up again and when depends more on the rhythm and how strong it is and how much it wants to wake up. Really has nothing to do with the cardioversion. So that's not any kind of long-term treatment. But you can see that if we shock somebody for atrial fibrillation, it's because they're having an episode, it's causing symptoms, it's causing rapid heart rates, and we're tired of waiting for it to go back to sleep on its own, so we choose to shock it to sleep, hoping that it's going to stay asleep for a while, or we use a medicine to keep it asleep once we shock it to sleep. But that's just for symptoms. If we're doing it for a dangerous rhythm, we're doing it to save somebody's life because they're in the dangerous rhythm at a life-threatening speed. They're not getting blood flow to their brain. The brain is dying, and they literally only have 20 to 30 minutes before they are brain dead. And that's where you have to shock them out of the rhythm. Even though it's not a permanent cure, it does save their life. Although statistically speaking, only about 10 to 15% of people who have these dangerous rhythms, which we call a cardiac arrest, actually make it to the hospital and survive. 80 to 85% of them never make it to the hospital, or make it to the hospital and they're severely brain damaged and they don't survive. Because think about it, if you're in a dangerous rhythm, your heart's going so fast that you're not getting adequate blood supply to your brain and you're dying, what's the chances that somebody's going to be around with defibrillator paddles to shock you out of it and save your life? Very low. That's why we put these defibrillator paddles, or AEDs, automatic defibrillation or automatic defibrillators, in public places. So that's why we put them in sporting events or grocery stores or schools or airports, just to increase the chances that if somebody has a cardiac arrest there, that somebody can actually shock them out of it. But most people who have these dangerous rhythms are at home and we just find them dead. So if you do survive one of these, you're very lucky. But that's why we invented years ago a device called an implantable cardiac defibrillator, or ICD for short. Defibrillators are devices that get implanted like a pacemaker, and those little wires are inside the heart. They grow into place just like pacemaker wires, and they can monitor your heart rhythm, and they can see what rhythm is in control and at what speed. If you stay in your normal rhythm, great. But if you go into an abnormal rhythm, and it turns out to be one of the dangerous life-threatening abnormal rhythms, making your heart go at a dangerous life-threatening speed, usually speeds over 200 beats per minute, where you're going to pass out and die, then the device has the ability to, it's a little computer, has the ability to recognize that, identify that you're in the dangerous rhythm, and then charge up and give you a shock to break you out of it to save your life. Having a defibrillator is literally like somebody following you around with defibrillator paddles for the rest of your life, waiting to shock you if you go into a dangerous rhythm. And they're going to follow you around for the rest of your life, whether you're alone or whether you're in the shower, it doesn't really matter. It's always there. And yes, it does hurt to get a shock. You do feel it. Just because you shock from the inside doesn't mean it's not painful like being shocked from the outside, but it's doing it to save your life. So people who have problems with dangerous rhythms, or felt to be at high risk for dangerous rhythms, or had an episode of the dangerous rhythm and was lucky enough to survive it and may not survive a second episode, they will receive defibrillators. Now, because a defibrillator is so much more advanced that it can identify abnormal rhythms and shock you for dangerous rhythms if you have it, and not shock you if you're in your normal rhythm or a non-dangerous rhythm like atrial fibrillation, it's smart enough to kind of figure that out too. It's so much more advanced than a simple pacemaker. Of course, it can do all the simple functions of a little pacemaker. It can pace your heart if your heart rate gets too slow, but that doesn't make it a pacemaker. It's a defibrillator. It's like saying that, oh, this person is driving a golf cart and somebody else is driving a Lamborghini. Well, you're not going to call the Lamborghini a souped up golf cart. You're going to call it a Lamborghini. Of course, it can do everything the golf cart can do because it's just much more advanced. We're calling a defibrillator a pacemaker is kind of an insult to the defibrillator. It's a more advanced device. Of course, it can do everything the pacemaker can do, but it can do more. It can shock you out of dangerous rhythms and save your life. And most of the people we give defibrillators to don't actually need it to pace like a pacemaker. Because if the person just had slow heart rates and needed to be paced with a pacemaker, they would get a pacemaker. They wouldn't get the more advanced device that can do more because that costs, $10,000 or $15,000 more, and the insurance wouldn't even pay for it. But if you have risk for dangerous rhythms, of course you're going to get a defibrillator. But it also means that if some point in your life you also develop this separate problem with slow heart rates, you're not going to need a separate pacemaker implanted. Your defibrillator can already do that and work like a pacemaker. So defibrillators and pacemakers are completely different devices that do completely different things, although a defibrillator can do pretty much everything a simple pacemaker can do. But you don't call it a defibrillator/pacemaker, you just call it a defibrillator.